Say good morning. Come on, Rick.
Roger, maybe you put your books on this.
Oh, good. Thank you. By
Just
the
hear
way,
what-
I told Jackie this morning about Rosie. Her response was like everybody else's. What?
Yeah, well, she's a private person.
She has a right to be. But, I mean, one of my problems with how she left so many years ago. Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. So good to see everybody. And thanks for your flexibility. I have something going on in the Heartsmark room. So we are the wandering Torah studiers. And this is good. This is good. I did not get a message about who has sponsored bagels this morning. Anybody remember who? Arthur and Stuart. And Stuart's birthday. When? The 6th? Okay, May 6th. Happy birthday, Stuart. And thanks for sponsoring, as you always do, for your birthdays. And who picked the bagels up this morning? Joan. Maud. Thank you very much for Maud. Okay, very good. All right. Let's do our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Lord our God, sovereign in the universe, who has sanctified us through God's commandments, enjoining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. I want to go back to the sheets from last week. How many of you have them? Oh, good. The rest of them, I will divulge, are still in my office. That would be great. On the chair in front. Okay, thanks so much. There's so much to talk about in terms of last week's portion, Kadoshim, and we really didn't even begin to look at some of the commentaries. So I thought before we move to this week's Parsha, Emor, which begins in chapter 21, I want to go back to those sheets and just spend a little time with the elaborations of those passages. So let's turn first to Leviticus 19, verse 17. Okay, so this is a very famous passage. 17 says, don't hate. The end of 18 says, love. I want to suggest to you, and this is not an original idea of mine, we'll see what Maimonides says about this, is that these two verses tell us how to move from hate to love. So let's look. I think there are 5 items in these 2 verses. You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. In your heart, of course, is important. Reprove or chastise your kinsman, but incur no guilt on account of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord. Okay? So there are 5 items here. Don't hate, chastise, don't take vengeance, don't bear a grudge, love. So I think the logic of this passage is, of the 5 items, the first item says don't do something. The 5th item says do something, love. And the 3 middle terms are the vehicles through which this passage suggests we can move from hate to love. Chastise the one who has wronged you or done wrong. Now that requires some understanding and explanation. Secondly, don't bear vengeance, take vengeance, don't bear a grudge. And if you follow that process, this passage suggests you will find yourself being able to move from hatred in your heart to loving your neighbor. And of course, the question is, what does it mean to love your neighbor? So this very famous passage requires a great deal of explanation. And that's why we have these passages here this morning. So we did do something of, so in your packet, which is coming around, I think we did do something about number 1, every person shall fear his mother and his father. So let's skip that. Let's go to first, before we get to our passage, let's look at items 2 and 3. That is the middle of the page. I know it's coming around, so I'm speaking slowly. And I'm pausing at periods, and less so at semicolons, and even less so at commas. Exclamation points hover over all of it, don't they? Okay, so Leviticus 19, verse 9. Do you see how I'm stalling here very, very ineptly? So Rashi is commenting on the statement, you shall not collect or the gleanings of your harvest. Okay, so when you reap your field, you're supposed to leave the corners, and then you're supposed to not go back and pick up what you left. And here's what Rashi says about it, I think very interestingly. Gleanings are ears that drop from the hand of the harvester during the reaping, 1 or 2 at a time, but 3 do not come under the category of leket. In other words, we have 2 kinds of obligations. To the poor in our community, but also to ourselves. You're to leave 1 or 2 ears that fall to the ground, but if 3 or more fall, you don't have to leave all of them. Because if you drop 10 and have to feel that this passage means you have to leave it all, you may not have enough to feed your own family. In other words, our obligations are to others, but not at cost to ourselves. So I like the comment, love your neighbor as yourself. What does as yourself mean? That we are our nearest neighbor. And loving our neighbors include loving ourselves and taking care of our needs too. You don't have to be self-abnegating. What you need to do is consider the needs of others without putting yourself in jeopardy. I think that's a magnificent idea. The next passage, which you can see, these are all from Leviticus chapter 19. Don't put a stumbling block before the blind. What does that mean? Well, if the blind is walking down the road, I'd better find a little branch, a twig, something like that, and not put that in front of the blind. That would be a literal reading of this. But the literal reading is overly narrow. It doesn't account for the concept of not putting a stumbling block before the blind. And here's what Rashi says. This implies, give not a person who is blind. Okay, so blind now in quotes means we're not talking about somebody who is literally blind only, but somebody who may not have the capacity to see or to see in a situation, namely to understand it. This implies give not a person who is blind in a matter of advice, which is improper for him. Do not say to him, sell your field and buy the proceeds of the sale, an ass. In other words, don't say to somebody, look, sell your field. You can make a profit on it. The fact being that you are endeavoring to circumvent him and to take the field from him. When you say, sell your field and buy profit, the appearance is, I'm looking out for his well-being. You can do something with this money rather than having it sit there. When all along, you're not accounting for the fact that he may be blind to your motive, which is to get him to sell the field to you. So Rashi is also now expanding the scope, the reach of this idea. The example that always occurs to me is a parent who abuses his or her children on the assumption that I'm the parent and you're the child, and part of my responsibility is to bring you into the straight and narrow of life, and therefore punishing you, restricting you, is part of my proper obligation as a parent. Where in fact, the child is not only being punished, but learning how to be a parent, and is likely to continue abusing his or her children in the next generation. So we have to be careful with those who are blind. The children may not be sophisticated enough to be able to say, this parent of mine is an abuser, but I know I don't have to be, that this is an aberration. The child may learn too much from what the parent is doing. The child is blind. So you can see that these two examples show that the mitzvah here is not to take advantage of those who may not see more deeply into what you are doing. Let's go to the next page. It says 4 on the top. Don't be a talebearer. Who is a talebearer? One who carries reports. So the rochel is also a merchant. And a merchant, think about a merchant, a traveling person who comes into a city and might hear some things. And might hear some things from me about my neighbor who has just moved to another city. And the merchant is not only gathering goods, he is gathering opinions, and especially gossip, and moves on to the next city and says to the neighbors of the person whom I hate, this person did so and so and so and so. That's the poison of gossip. So a merchant here is not only a person who deals in goods, but who deals in talk. And if the merchant especially is not embedded in the community and therefore would pay a price for gossip. The merchant is free to do with the talk in that city what he or she wants because the person is moving on. So dealing in goods, literally, figuratively, is a problem. Who is a talebearer? One who carries reports and goes about from one person to another and says, so-and-so said this, such and such a statement I have heard about so-and-so. Even if what he says or repeats may be true. Notice that this passage is expanding the scope of improper talk. Even if what he says or repeats may be true, the talebearer ruins the world. Wow. Ruins the world? I mean, that's hyperbole, but it does suggest that there's a big problem here. You know what I say to one of you? We both know so-and-so, and that is such a great person. You know what he did the other day? And your temptation may be, if you don't share my affection for that person, to say, on the other hand, I know you're praising this person, but I know something about him that you don't know. Even if I say something that's true, that might invite gossip. Pretty high standard. I mean, the question that we're left with is, what the heck can we talk about? Even if what the person says or repeats may be true, the talebearer ruins the world. And it's hyperbole, but there's a point here. Because gossip is passed from one person to another, we love to talk to X about Y. It makes us closer to X. We get to really express our opinion about Y in a so-called safe way. You know, triangulation is extremely dangerous, isn't it? If I'm having a problem with somebody here at the temple and I go to somebody else and I talk about it, I feel closer to that person. But that person may pass it on to somebody else. And we're all feeling like we're in the in-group. So I'm less alienated from B at the cost of bringing C's reputation into question. There is still a graver offense that comes with this prohibition, namely the evil tongue, lashon hara. This means talking disparagingly of anyone, even though what one says is true. So, I can talk about the truth that is positive, I can talk about it that is negative. But he who utters falsehood is called a slanderer, motzi shem ra, to bring a bad name to that person. A person with an evil tongue is the one who, sitting in company, says, that person did such and such a thing. So-and-so's ancestors were so-and-so. I've heard this about him. And then proceeds to talk scandal. Innocent talk about somebody else can begin to lead to negative talk. Of such a person, Scripture says, may the Lord cut off all smooth lips, the tongue that speaketh proud things. How Maimonides knew this quote in Psalm 12, I'll never be able to fathom. I mean, think about it. Proof texts in these guys and gals come from the remotest parts of the Bible. I mean, I can quote the Bible on some things, but the book of Proverbs, I never cite. I don't know the book of Proverbs. I mean, I know something about it, but I'm not enough to quote it. These people know all of these things. The sages say there are 3 offenses for which one is punished in this world and forfeits his portion in the world to come. Forfeiting your portion in the world to come can really mean 2 things, both of which the rabbis agree to. There is a world to come. The rabbis, Rabbinic Judaism, believes in life after death, resurrection of the body, immortality of the soul. These are 2 axioms of Rabbinic Judaism. The Bible is silent about both. The Bible is steadfastly this worldly. Now, if I'm a rabbi in early rabbinic Judaism and I'm trying to make a case for life after death, and I realize that the Bible offers me no clear precedents, I'm going to find them anyway, because I want to justify my belief, about which I am proud and not ashamed, but I need to ground it in the fundamental text. And so the rabbis search around for texts. Here's a good example. The beginning of Exodus 15, the Song of Moses. Az Yashir Moshe. Yashir is in the future tense. Then Moses will sing. Oh? He's singing now. What do you mean he will sing? An allusion to the afterlife. So the rabbis now find this. When Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 2 reads this psalm about praising God, that God kills and makes alive. Oh, I think the right way to say it is makes alive and kills. Before we die, we're here. You can't kill something that's not already alive. Why does she switch the natural order? There's life after death. Kills and makes alive. So I think we could say, not definitively, would be the rabbi's point, that this is poetic license, that she's not talking about life after death. But the rabbis who go to the text with this belief in mind are looking for ways to find it. So that's the first. By the way, when people ask me what do Jews believe about life after death, I say to them, there are two traditions in Judaism, the biblical tradition and the rabbinic tradition. The biblical tradition is carried on through Midrash. The rabbinic tradition is carried on through talk about halakha, codes, things that Maimonides does. So that since the Bible is silent about life after death, and the rabbis are verbose about it, I say to people, you want to be an authentic Jew? You have your choice. Because there are two streams of understanding in the Jewish tradition. I'm not saying that being an authentic Jew is limited to one of those two things, but just over and against this issue. Am I going to be traditional if I don't believe in it? Well, the Bible doesn't say. Vivian?
I'm thinking about Sheol. There is a mention of going down to Sheol in grief or something,
Right.
which suggests something after death.
Right, very good. So Vivian is talking about Sheol, which I think it's fair to say the Bible feels is a place where we go after death, but it has no implications about reward and punishment. It just is a place where I'm gathered, here's the phrase the Bible uses, gathered to my ancestors. Now, when the King James Version translates these things, it imposes some of its own views on the text. So, for example, the King James Version takes the word nephesh, which means life principle or a person, and translates it faithfully as soul. Once you get soul in your text and you're thinking platonically, there's body as well, soul and body. And what is the career of the soul? Now you have to think about the career of the soul. And it opens up the whole idea of the immortality of the soul. So this translation of life force, which is monistic, that is, it doesn't divide us into two parts, is not committed to some afterlife. Once you say soul, you've introduced a Greek idea into the Bible. I mean, it's true that the rabbis now come to embrace it, but the Bible does not. And of course, Protestantism has the notion of sola scriptura, the Bible alone, Scripture alone, right? That's what what Luther did to translate the Bible into German is to create the beginnings of modern German language, because he wanted to put the text in the hands of everybody, and not just the elite. If it's still in Latin, it's only the elite that reads it and can tell us what it means. Luther believes in the priesthood of all believers, and therefore everybody should have access to the fundamental revelation. And by translating it, he creates the modern German language. It's so fascinating, isn't it? Jim? Says you. Yeah, no, Jim's making an interesting point. So I've pointed to two notions of life after death in early rabbinic Judaism: resurrection of the body, immortality of the soul. Jim is indicating that in the Middle Ages with the Kabbalah, a third idea, reincarnation, enters the Jewish tradition. So interesting that from the biblical basis of none of it, we get a flowering, a flourishing of a variety of ideas. Some of this has to do with the interaction of the Jews with other cultures. They may very well have gotten the early ideas from a Zoroastrian religion in their exiles. Jack?
I was going to say, there are some scholars that argue that the Christian idea of heaven and hell comes from early Christianity assimilating Greek and Roman pagans.
Yeah.
Because if you think about the idea of like paradise versus eternal punishment, it's very similar to what the Greeks had with Elysium versus the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm wondering if there's any influence in that sense of Greek tradition on rabbinic Judaism.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know when it starts. Certainly Augustine, St. Augustine, who dies in something like 420, was raised in Greek schools and understood Greek culture, and then works a kind of synthesis. Thomas Aquinas, of course, in the 13th century, does that with greater comprehensiveness. Oh yeah, I mean, when cultures interact with other cultures, syncretism, borrowing, is bound to happen. On the twin assumption that we're not immune from the impact of those with whom we live, but also that other cultures have something to offer us. My favorite example, you've heard me say it often, is that Zionism, modern Zionism, would not have existed if we didn't borrow from the cultures around us. The growth of 19th century nationalism, agrarianism in Russia, revolution, and so on. Not to ignore technology, the telegraph, the railroad, the steamboat. All these things make Zionism possible, both ideologically and functionally. And unless we had borrowed from our neighbors, that movement may not have flourished the way it did. Ellen?
I don't know if I'm wrong or not, but I believe that I don't know if Reform Judaism, but other conservative and Orthodox don't believe in cremation. So if you're cremated, do they think that you won't be reproduced?
Look, I don't know enough about what they believe to say anything definitively. I think that you're right. They don't believe in cremation. But don't forget, when you have God in your system, God can do anything. And God can even recreate a cremated body. So that if we think in a more pedestrian way, we say, hey, if you destroy the body, immortality or resurrection is impossible. But that doesn't reckon with God's miraculous works. In what do they believe? Yes. I mean, some rabbis will not bear, Reform rabbis will not bury cremation. I think I would break the answer to your question into two parts, theoretical and practical. Theoretically, we might say, we don't agree with this notion that if you cremate, there's no life after death. We might say that. The other, more practical, is we borrow from our neighbors. If we're living among other peoples who engage in cremation and we refuse to do it, let's say X dies and X's family says we want cremation, and I say to them, we don't do that. How am I going to explain this to my neighbors? We seem strange. All our neighbors cremate and see nothing problematic about it. We don't want to be marginalized in the society in which we live. Not only do I have to get along with my neighbors, I do business with them. And if they see us as strange or anti-modern, they may go somewhere else. So I think that also plays a role in the kinds of things we embrace and to what degree and what we let go. But there, one could also say, in other words, if my real motive in allowing it is I don't want these congregants to feel alienated, I might say to them, well, we don't really believe in it for theoretical reasons. I'm not being totally honest, though I might not come out and say we do it because our neighbors do it. Margie?
Two things. One, the book of Daniel goes awfully close.
Oh, yes, it does.
It really does say, some will awake from sleeping in the dust, right? But the question I have is it possible that the rabbinic rabbis were so aware that part of the core of Christianity as Jews were even breaking off from Judaism to be Christian was the promise of afterlife, belief in Jesus. So, I mean, is it possible that that influenced them to find a way that we also have afterlife?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. I mean, your point is parallel Jack's point, that a particular belief system is bound to be impacted by another system, Christianity and Greek philosophy, and Margie, what you're suggesting as well, which makes it very difficult to talk about a word, a phrase that has been used pretty much up until the last 50 or 60 years, normative Judaism, as if there is a form of Judaism which is pure and which continues on even though lots of other things are happening. So if we want to be real Jews, let's go back to what's normative. And our discussion today has given the lie to that idea. I mean, all traditions, especially vital traditions, are always, we always have eyes that look in and that look out. And when we look out, for good reason, we want to be part of a larger society, so we're impacted by it. We're bound at some point to begin to select something that's very attractive that we think can help us. Once again, I'll just mention Ahad Ha'am, the great Zionist theoretician, who has an essay with the title Imitation and Assimilation. Now, we might think what he's going to talk about is that any time we imitate our neighbors, that's going to lead to assimilation. So what he's going to talk about, we think, is the problem inherent in borrowing. We need to remain, to some degree, self-enclosed so that our religion is not contaminated by imitation, which leads to assimilation. And Echad Ha'am's essay wants to say this is too narrow an understanding. And he makes the point about two kinds of imitation: slavish imitation and competitive imitation. Slavish imitation is, I look over the wall and I see some wonderful things going on out there. I'd like to be like them. So I'm going to start doing just that. That leads to a sense of belittling who we are and elevating who they are because I want to be like them. So the impulse here is moving out of the community to some degree, at least mentally, which leads to assimilation. The other way is to look beyond our walls and say, hey, those are really good ideas. Nationalism, the development, the whole history of Italian nationalism, of German nationalism, bringing disparate groups together that make a nation more coherent. You know, I like that. I'm going to bring it back home, and I'm going to use that idea in a Jewish way, hence Zionism. Okay? That's competitive imitation. Slavish is, you're better than I am, I want to go out there. Competitive is, you've got something which can help us, and you can help us be better. We're not trying to assimilate, we're trying to do better. So that interaction with another society or culture, depending on our attitude about ourselves, the slavish imitators are already anxious about who they are and not fully committed. The competitive imitators feel robustly about who we are, but recognize we can learn something from the outside. Their interaction is healthy and good, whereas the slavish is problematic. So all borrowing is not problematic. That's what Acham wants to say. It's a brilliant essay. Scott?
Not to discredit the book of Daniel or Margie's assertion, but wasn't that was one of the later books, and I think it was written in Aramaic, which reinforces what you're saying about assimilation.
I'm not
There's another culture and another translation there.
You may be right about the Aramaic. I don't know if there's any Aramaic, but it would stand to reason because you're right that Daniel is a very late book. Think about it. The book of Daniel is placed in the writings group, right? Torah, prophets, writings. Why isn't Daniel in the prophet? Daniel's a prophet. Doesn't he belong in the second section? And the answer is yes, but Daniel was written after the prophetic section became canonical. Once something becomes canonical, the boundaries are very strong. Nothing that's in gets out, and nothing that's out gets in. And Daniel was too late to get in.
What was you mentioned an essay or a book, it was assimilation and something.
That's Echad Ha'am, that's two words, A-H-A-D, second word, H-A with an apostrophe, which means one of the people. His given name was Asher Ginsberg, but he took a pen name, very ironically, because Echad Ha'am was anything but one of the people. He was an elitist who was an beginner. He's always criticizing what everybody else was doing. I do want to say one thing about the book of Daniel, because Margie is right. Daniel is one of the latest books canonized. And in chapter 12, the book of Daniel was probably written in the wake of the Maccabee issue. And the issue began to appear that, my gosh, the people who died to sanctify God's name, can nothing happen to them after they die? What about the martyrs? The word martyr means witness. What about those, to their detriment, witness to the faith in God? Is it plausible that that's the end for them? And so, as Margie points out, this is the beginning of the idea of Tchiat HaMetim, the resurrection of the dead. That's its origin in our literature. Patty?
First, I don't think nationalism was such a great idea to imitate, but I wanted to go back to Lashon Hara.
You to what?
Lashon
Lashon Hara. Mhm.
I can see so many instances where actually sharing information with other people in a community is a healthy thing.
Yeah.
The benefits would so outweigh the chance of mentioning a fact to someone who might use it for their own ulterior motive. For instance, even sharing something horrible like someone's passed away in the family of a friend that we know, and we get those emails all the time. It's nice to know that so that you can reach out and share condolences. Or if someone's lost a job or been laid off, it's kind of good to share that information in the community so that there are opportunities to find new work. There's a whole list that I can think that it's actually a good thing to take that risk and share information amongst a community of people that you believe have the best interest of that person.
So Patty's making a really excellent point here that, let me put it this way, there is no algorithm through which we can decide what to talk about and what not to talk about. The issue of yes or no finally is a matter of judgment. And here I'm going to quote your most favorite philosopher, Aristotle. So Aristotle says that there are values, which he calls prima facie values. I have them on my 3x5 card. I carry them around. Don't lie. Prima facie means all things being equal, when I enter a situation in which I have to talk about, maybe lie, I have to ask myself, is this the right situation in which to deploy that idea? Prima facie, but not absolute. And I've got a bunch of them. There are occasions when what a prima facie value tells us what to do, but when the situation demands violating it, another moral idea enters the picture. Famously, if a friend of mine is being chased by somebody who's got a knife in his hands and he comes to me and I hide him in the closet and that person sees that happen and knocks on my door, do you know where Plony is? Now, should I say yes if don't lie is absolute? But it's preposterous for me to say yes. Our good judgment would say, no, don't do that. In other words, that prima facie value, don't lie, does not apply in certain situations. And it's not immoral to lie. That's the point. So Aristotle says we carry around prima facie values, but the decision rests with judgment. What is judgment? Judgment is the application of a general principle to a specific situation. The general principle may always be there, but situations differ. And therefore, at time t, that principle may very well apply. But at time t sub 1, it may not. How do I know? Judgment. Judgment is a faculty that develops through experience. It can't be taught a priori. We can get a lot of good principles under our belts, and I think that, Patty, that's what you're saying, that we should not absolutize this idea. What we should do, I think, is to be aware of the power of talk and ask ourselves when we're about to say something, is this a good thing to do, or is it not a good thing to do? And judgment is refined not by sitting at home and reading, but through experience. And so how to deploy these ideas is something for which I say algorithm. There's no automatic decision procedure which will lead us to the right answer. Isn't that great? It's very sophisticated. We have to have certain principles. We have to recognize their power, but we also cannot become doctrinal about them because situations differ. And as we experience life, we become, hopefully, more sophisticated about the implications of what we say and do. So that morality is not a matter of learning stuff and then doing. It's a matter of learning and then doing in order to be able to do the right thing. And the one implication is we never know for sure, because we can't predict the consequences of what we talk about. So it's always, talk is always risky. But, just as you say, Joe?
One way I've heard it expressed is that, good judgment is an end state. But what Jews do is lahadil. We distinguish one thing from another.
Uh-huh.
And if you think about the whole Talmudic process, that's what the rabbis are doing. They're taking every single situation and distinguishing it. So it's really what we have to do, not assume we have good judgment because we have experience. No matter how old we are, how much experience we have, we should be looking at absolutely everything and saying, how do I distinguish this from something else? And we know that most of the Talmudic arguments end in tikkun. They end with not even the rabbis agree. After they distinguished everything from everything, they still leave it open and say, well, and we don't know. So I think that's, and I read an interesting thing for those of you interested in AI, that as the hardest part of AI for all of us in the future is going to be who's going to distinguish whether what AI does is any good or not.
Of course.
And the ability to distinguish is going to be the most important attribute, because as someone who's, you're not going to do the work anymore, you're just going to try to distinguish whether the result is good. And maybe we ought to all go to yeshiva and learn the Talmudic process, because those are the people that are going to be able to understand the output of AI and what better than others.
Well, you've said a lot there. I mean, I doubt if you're right about that those who study the Shiva are going to know how to deal with these things, because as you pointed out a few seconds earlier, the rabbis themselves come to what we call a dead end, and they say, we don't know. That's why there are codes, Maimonides' code, the Shulchan Aruch, because the Talmud often does not decide an issue. And so that's very good theoretically. Some issues are not decidable. The best we can do is get the different alternatives and leave it at that. But communities need to know, should I do this or should I do that? And so codes take the ambiguity, I suppose, in the resolution and try to say this is what it is. That's what Maimonides does in the Mishnah Torah. What he's criticized for is he doesn't cite his sources, and he doesn't tell us whether or not the Talmud has made a decision. He makes a decision and doesn't justify it. That's why Maimonides says that really you only need to read two Jewish books, the Torah and the Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah means repetition of the Torah, just like Deuteronomy is called Mishnah Torah, which is totally false. Deuteronomy makes a lot of changes, but it presents itself as a repetition of the Torah. Maimonides is saying that the 14 books of the Mishnah Torah, the distillation of 2,500 years of Jewish law, is the real thing. You don't need the arguments. I'm telling you what the decision is. There are two kinds of arrogance. An arrogance that's not deserved and an arrogance that is. See, if somebody asked Einstein, are you good at physics? No, not really. I mean, come on. Of course I am. I'm one of the masters of it. That's arrogance that's deserved. And Maimonides thinks is arrogant. Read the Torah and then come to me. 2,500 years later, Torah in 1300 before the Common Era, Maimonides 1200 of the Common Era. So you know the need for this, it's a very delicate dialectic. We need to know what to do at a certain time. Should I do it? On the other hand, as Joe points out, so many issues are undecidable in principle if you look at it. You mentioned instinct. See, to me, instinct is not something we're born with. We have instincts. But instinct in the moral sense is something that's developed. It's not just there. Because instinct is judgment. What should I do here and now? That can't be taught. That has to be a process, a product of experience and thinking and reflection. I come home one night and I say, this is what I did at 12 o'clock today. Gosh, did I do the right thing? Let me think about this a little bit more. So, all of these things. All right, so, Bob?
I want to get back to the thought of a life after death.
Yes.
We always wonder why God is angry and kills people. It doesn't make sense to us.
Yeah.
Is it a stretch to think that God is killing people with the idea of you're going to come back and you're going to get a second chance, and I'm teaching you now what you did was wrong, and see if you can come to a different way of thinking.
So that would be reincarnation. You get a second chance here. But I think that, you know, you're raising the problem of theodicy, the justice of God. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why am I suffering? And, you know, Harold Kushner's wonderful book, which is not, the title of which is not why bad things happen to good people, it's when. We don't know why, but what we can do is respond to people in need who are suffering. So we don't know the answer to the question, but I think you've got a good insight here. We can't believe that the God we worship, who created the universe as a good thing, is going to let injustices or felt injustices happen. So there's got to be something more. So one way of thinking about the origins of this notion of life after death is what happens in our lives is not perfectly reasonable, but we can't believe that an infinite God would leave it at that. Yeah. You know, the philosopher Schopenhauer in the 19th century says, if we knew for sure there was life after death for everybody, or we knew for sure that there was no life after death at all, religion would vanish. I mean, that's very reductive, that religion is all about justice. But he's making an interesting point that this notion of life after death can be manipulated by the church and the synagogue. Do the right thing, or else you won't get whatever the reward is. Thank you for telling me that. Who is the arbiter of the right thing? I am. Your clergy. So this idea can be manipulated. This is Spinoza's idea, that the clergy has manipulated people into believing that everything is at stake by doing the right thing, and that we are the arbiters of what it is. So Spinoza was not necessarily antagonistic to religion in one form, but he was antagonistic to the church and its power. And if we were going to develop a society where philosophy was not in danger, where freedom of speech, where democracy was possible, we have to limit the power of the clergy. It's not the religion per se, it's the manipulation of it. So, yeah, I mean, one could say that the origin of this has this powerful foundation. And you know, it's very comforting to people. I mean, I certainly don't know what happens after we die. I know what I believe, but my belief is not knowledge. Ivan,
This discussion about the Talmud reminds me of a podcast I heard recently, and the topic the podcaster was addressing was he was wondering why Jews comprise about 0.2% of the population, but have won about 20% of the Nobel Prizes.
yeah,
And he was trying to come up with answers as to why that disparity.
mm-hmm.
And one of his answers was because of the Talmud, because the whole literature and the whole upbringing is, there really are no absolute answers. And what a person has to do is question and not be afraid to come up with different answers that existed in the past,
Yeah,
which has freed the Jewish scientists and literature writers and everything to come up with these new ideas
yeah.
because they weren't bound by absolute answers.
No, I think it's a good point. And that one of the canons of science is that the conclusions that one reaches are always subject to further investigation, testability, and so on. I mean, Newton's whole cosmology, which was so dominant for centuries, has been shown by relativity to be basically limited, true in certain domains, but not in others. So modern science, modern physics and astronomy challenges some of the givens that were taken for granted. Yeah, right.
And the thought was like the Talmud gives the Jewish scientists the permission to challenge the older answers,
Look,
come up with new answers.
I like it. I think it's powerful. It doesn't account for modern Jewish culture in which the Talmud doesn't play a positive role. You know, it's, in a certain sense, it's reductive. It suggests that contributions, discoveries by scientists has a kind of Talmud methodology at its basis. But in cultures that have assimilated to some degree, are not reading the Talmud anymore, are not subject to Talmudic lines of thinking, how come they get Nobel Prizes?
Well, because it's still the way, even though they're not currently going to Talmud Torah, their way of thinking has been shaped by that history.
The fundamental postulate of all society is Talmudic reasoning. Really? No, I'm teasing a little bit. No, I think it's powerful, the mode of Jewish education, but in an era where fewer and fewer people are educated to any significance so they can take on issues themselves, I think is under a lot of stress from assimilation and acculturation. And of course, we're trying, as all traditional cultures are trying, to reassert themselves and their power. But, you know, modern, secular, whatever the adjectives are, is centrifugal. That energy flies away from the circle as opposed to centripetal. Joe.
Just real quickly, I don't think we should underestimate the mimetic effect that passes through the generations, even though the soup is thinning. So that the Talmudic idea, the approach, I think, has been taught down mimetically through the generations. And many of these people carry that forward without actually Talmud study. A few more generations and the soup will probably be so thin that it will be gone. Maybe that's why we're here studying, trying to thicken the soup again.
Right. And why in recent last couple of years our religious school has been burgeoning with students and activities and so on, because one of the imperatives for us is to pass on our traditions and knowledge and ways of being in the world to the next generations. So it's always a struggle, because societies, especially permeable ones that aren't behind closed walls, are always borrowing. All right, let's go back here. So we're on page 4, and so we've done number 2 on this issue of gossip. So the sages say, I'm in 3. Do you see where I am? There are 3 offenses for which one is punished in this world and forfeits his portion in the world to come. And very briefly, as I started to say many minutes ago, the world to come can be understood literally, it can be understood figuratively, as a way of saying this is ultimate. This is something of ultimate significance, not literally another world. I'm not saying the other world idea is wrong, but there's another way to understand it. I think the rabbis are being poetic here as well as literal. These are idolatry, incest, and murder. Now those are your big 3 sins. We're supposed to give up all but 3 of the 613 commandments if life is at stake. Life is more important than 610 of the 613 commandments. But for 3 commandments, we are supposed to give up our lives, because those 3 commandments point to something that is more ultimate than life itself. And these are the big 3. He doesn't talk about it in those terms here. He's just saying these are the 3 major problems. These are idolatry, incense, and murder. But the evil tongue is equal to all 3 put together. Oh my gosh. Really? The sages further said to indulge in evil speech is like the denial of the fundamental principle of religion. And this quote points to what that is. As it is said, who said, our tongue will we make mighty, and our lips are with us? Who is Lord over us? What's the fundamental principle of religion implied in these quotes? I am not at the center of the universe. In other words, egotism is a violation of the fundamental principle of religion. The main value and power resides in God and what God does, not me. Okay? So, gossip is a denial of the fundamental principle of religion, because it takes me, hey, I've got this to say, I want to tell you about that other person, and I feel I have a right to do so, even though it's a sin to do it. Who can tell me what to do? I'm the top of the pyramid. That's a violation, the evil tongue. As it is said, who said, our tongue will make me mighty, our lips, and so on. The sages also said the evil tongue slays 3 persons: the utterer of the evil, the listener, and the one spoken about. And the listener will be punished worse than the speaker. Now that's counterintuitive, isn't it? I'm just an innocent person here. The speaker is just saying it to me. In what sense can that be true? The listener is likely, Vivian?
The listener is encouraging the one who's speaking, so that maybe the one who's speaking will then go and speak it some more.
Yeah.
But if you refuse to listen, maybe they'll shut up.
You cut it off. I remember a personal example. I was having lunch with Rabbi Zerler, who was here up until 10, 15 years ago. We were sitting there, and I started talking about somebody else. And he said to me, I don't want to go there. Cut the conversation short. Had I been able to go on with it, I might have felt emboldened and encouraged. He, for all of his loathing of that idea, my gosh, this is interesting information. Maybe I should pass it on. So what he did, that's why I bring it up, he cut it. I was embarrassed, and we didn't go on with it. So the listener has a lot of power. That's interesting. The one who is passive is the most dangerously potential active player in this triad. This, I think, is amazingly insightful, isn't it, about the power of talk. It's not just if I hit you, do I hurt you. If I talk about you, positive or negatively, to somebody else, it's worse than hitting you. I saw somebody with a hand. Jim? No.
But the listener also has the discretion of giving credit to what's being said or disregarding it. Particularly, just as an example, a political rally, the guy's yelling at you. So somehow you might think, oh, this might be true. But you have an obligation, which very few people take, to say, can that possibly be true? Why does this guy know better than me? He doesn't,
Yeah.
but it works.
And this is similar to Patty's point about some talk, third-party talk, is important. There are occasions when what is a problem in some circumstances is not a problem. That's the issue of judgment. And you're pointing to it as well. Scott?
I was going to make that exact same point Jim did, but I shut myself down because I think the speaker has the same choice as the listener. Has the choice of discretion and future discretion, both do. Do I pass this along? Do I say this again? I don't see why one is weighted heavier than.
Well, I think that's what Patty said, and I sort of elaborated on the power of that idea. Wouldn't it be better if we were machines, where you put the data in and out comes the answer? But we're not, because situations different. There are all kinds of factors in every situation, and if we become mechanical about it, we miss opportunities to do the right thing. So this is what experience. Joe talks about instinct, developing our instincts. Often I will think about, should I do X or Y? And I let it rest a little bit in my head, and the answer tends to emerge, not so much I should do X, but that I shouldn't do Y. So letting it rest is not really an active way of assessment, but you're counting on your experience. Somehow I have enough experience that the answer will come to me, and I'll recognize it as it does. Yeah, I call it the refrigerator theory of decision making. Should I buy that refrigerator? The freezer's at the bottom. I see the point there. I'm used to it at the top. I don't know. Let me sit with it for a while. And the answer appeared to me. Doesn't always happen that way. So that's the refrigerator theory. Let's turn the page, and I'm on page 5. And this is, as you can see down near the bottom, Maimonides from the Mishnah Torah, the laws of ethical dispositions. So, he takes on the whole subject. Whoever entertains in his heart hatred of any Israelite, all right, we might say, why not any person? Well, I think the answer, however satisfactory it might or might not be, is that the Jews in the Middle Ages tended to live by themselves. They were concerned with intra-community issues and not so concerned with what was going on in the outside world. So it makes some sense. This is corrected later by Samson Raphael Hirsch on the next page, who says all people. These two answers are functions of sociology. What was the sociology of the medieval community? What's the sociology of modern Jewish communities? Different answers. Whoever entertains in his heart hatred of any Israelite transgresses a prohibition, as it is said, you shall not hate your brother in your heart, quoting the first verse of our cluster of verses. The violation of this precept is, however, not punished with stripes, a larger, more intense form of punishment, as no overt act is involved. This is all internal. The Torah in this text only warned against hatred in the heart, but anyone who smites or reviles his neighbor, although he is not permitted to do so, is not infringing the precept, don't hate your neighbor in your heart. Okay? When a person sins against another, the injured party should not hate the offender and keep silent, as it is said concerning the wicked. Maimonides knows this story. And Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor evil, for Absalom hated Amnon. It festered, and he finally killed him. That was the problem of not speaking up. But it is his duty to inform the offender and say to him, why did you do this to me? Why did you sin against me in this matter? And thus it is said, you shall surely rebuke your neighbor. Okay? And there's power in this idea, at least at the beginning of the discussion. Don't let it fester. It might poison your relationship. Try to have a conversation. If the offender repents and pleads for forgiveness, he should be forgiven, with the implication that if the offender is the sinner, but the offender comes to the one offended, the one offended comes to the sinner and says, you did this, and the offender says, I'm sorry. And the one talking says, I'm not going to accept it. I'm not ready to accept your apology. This person is on the way to becoming the sinner. Because we have to give each other the benefit of the doubt, however hard it is. Because what we're talking about here, among other things, is what are the causes of a healthy society? If the offender repents and pleads forgiveness, he should be forgiven. The forgiver should not be obdurate. As it is said, Abraham prayed to God for Avimelech in chapter 20 of Genesis. When Avimelech did something wrong, Abraham went to God and said, forgive this person. Not exactly parallel, but Abraham was willing to try to rectify or bring the relationship back. If one observes that a person committed a sin or walks in a way that is not good, it is a duty to bring the erring man back to the right path and point out to him that he is wronging himself by his evil courses. As it is said, you shall surely rebuke your neighbor. Okay? So criticism is encouraged. He who rebukes another, whether for offenses against the rebuker himself or for sins against God, violating one of the commandments of the Torah, should not administer the rebuke in private. Now, see what is happening here. Who's the problematic person in this dyad? The sinner. If he's sinning against me, I go to him. But I'm not free to do it any old way I want to. Just because I've been wronged doesn't mean any kind of rebuke is valid. Look, you sinned against me, and I'm going to let you have it. No. Now we're dealing with the ethics of rebuke. He who rebukes another, whether for offenses against the rebuker himself or for sins against God, should administer the rebuke in private, speak to the offender gently and tenderly, who's still a person, and point out that he's only speaking for the wrongdoer's own good. This is a little dangerous. I'm just doing it for your sake. But ought to have that motive in mind. I myself do the same sorts of things that you do, but we all need to be improved. I need to be improved just as you do. And I'm just trying to point out to you because I'm really concerned for your well-being. And to secure for him a life in the world to come. So that can be understood in the two ways we talked about. If the latter accepts the rebuke, well and good. If not, he should be rebuked a second and a third time. And so one is bound to continue the admonitions. Why? Not only to have some catharsis of his own, but in order to try to bring an element of society back to health. And so one is bound to continue the admonitions till the sinner assaults the admonisher, says to him, I refuse to listen. Whoever's in a position to prevent wrongdoing and doesn't do so is responsible for the iniquity of all the wrongdoers whom he might have checked. Notice the Torah passage. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. What does incur no guilt? If I have an opportunity to help the wrongdoer not do it again, and I don't do it, the wrongs that the wrongdoer does in the future now become my sin as well, because I had an opportunity to help him to see the wrongness, okay? So that I become implicated in not doing it and not doing it well. So, not suffering sin on a part of him, because of him, is the second half of verse 17. But incur no guilt because of him. 8. He who rebukes another must not at first speak to the offender harshly, more on ethics, so as to put him to shame, as it is said, and you shall not suffer sin because of him. This is a different kind of suffering sin. Not that you were co-responsible for the further evil deeds. But if you rebuke a person badly, you become a sinner. Thou shalt not suffer sin because of him. This is the second connotation of the tail of that T-A-I-L. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. There are two ways. Don't you see? There are two ways of incurring guilt. Not talking to him and talking badly. If somebody wrongs me and I decide to go to them, I'm feeling pretty high and mighty. You sinned against me, and I'm going to point this out to you. I'm ticked off and so on. So, and I proceed to say, whatever occurs to me, I'm angry and I feel justified. As if my role in that conversation is neutral. The sinner is only that guy. But I myself can become a sinner by certain actions. And one of them is not maintaining the proper ethical stance. Even when I am ticked off, I still have moral responsibility. Our rabbis explain this text as follows. Since it might have been supposed that you are to rebuke the sinner till he changes color, in other words, till he's so embarrassed that he's reddening in the face. And by the way, if I embarrass somebody in public and they blush, the rabbis say that is tantamount to murder. That's how serious it is. But they get the hook to say that because when I blush, my face turns red, like I'm shedding blood. But the rabbis are just exaggerating to make a very powerful point. Since it might be supposed that you are to rebuke the sinner till he changes color, therefore it is said, and you shall not bear sin because of him. Hence the inference that is forbidden to put an Israelite to shame, especially in public. I'm ticked off, but I still have to be aware that I am a moral agent in this process of rebuking. Although one who puts another to shame is not punished with stripes, still it is a grave offense. And thus the sages said, he who shames another in public has no portion in the world to come. Namely, this is a serious matter, whether or not it's to be taken literally. One ought therefore to be, try it out when you're rebuking somebody or you're criticizing somebody, and say to them, you might be losing your place in the world to come. And report back to me at how it goes. But hold on just a sec. One ought therefore to beware of publicly shaming anyone, whether he be young or old. One should not call a person by a name of which he feels ashamed, or relate anything in his presence which humiliates him. Don't you love the way this passage shifts what's at risk here? Of course the guy you're rebuking has done something wrong, and if you have the courage to go to that person and to talk to them ethically, that person whose place, whose action is at stake here, is perhaps rectified. But along the way, the light of the sinner, who's the light shining on here? The sinner. But it comes to shine on the rebuker, who is inclined because, let's face it, we're all human. And when we feel wronged, we feel justified to say a bunch of stuff. And this becomes not the real problem. Vivian and then Margie.
So this is the ultimate lashon hara, right? If someone did something to me and I'm yelling at them in public,
Yeah.
I'm basically telling this tale to everybody that can hear it.
That's a good point. But it's not inherently lashon hara, because it can and should happen in private.
In private, yes.
But if it doesn't, then you're right. It doesn't inherently have lashon hara at its base if I say it privately. But if I feel justified enough that, hey, David, in front of everybody, and so on. Okay, yeah, Margie.
This is a big question. Do you feel this has implications for criticizing Israel?
Yeah.
People use the tough
I think it's, look, I think it's as complicated as this is, really. The whole premise behind this whole episode is doing wrong deserves a response. If one feels that Israel has done something wrong, prima facie, before we've thought about it further, it deserves a response. Why should Israel, I might say, if it does something morally deeply problematic, why should it be immune from the criticism that I offer to any other person or country? On the other hand, just as this is based upon the nature of relationship, I don't have to rebuke everybody, but the people with whom I am in contact, a part of my community, there becomes an ethics of how to do it. So I would say two things are the case, just off the top of my head. Yes, we have a right to criticize Israel. But since we're in relationship with Israel in one way or another, some of us very intensely, some of us more marginally, then we have to ask ourselves, what are the implications for the relationship we have and the dignity of the entity we're criticizing? But I don't believe that we have to say to ourselves, we're not going to criticize, because that's going to allow others to be critical. I don't think that's right. I think it's a tribute to somebody if I say to them, you know, it's hard to do. You know, you said something that really bothers me. It's a tribute to them. I care about them, and I want to talk to them. The same with Israel. There's such a thing as righteous criticism, that we care, and therefore we should be able to do it. In a way, it's an insult if I feel that no matter what Israel does, I'm not going to criticize. That's an insult. That's condescension. This is a real country with real challenges, and sometimes, you know, they get it wrong. And loyalists can say that. Now, maybe not publish it in the paper, but we can say it. I think that all of this is a spinning out of the logic of relationship. What does real relationship entail? Honesty, but not recklessness. Doris?
Well, overriding everything that we've been talking about on page 5 and page 4, for me, is the issue of the difference between sins of omission and sins of commission. Because the Ten Commandments come as commands that are active. Those are sins of commission. Don't do these things. But attached to every one is the possibility of a sin of omission. So don't speak badly about blacks in your neighborhood. The reason we're not renting to them because they're dirty, they are dishonest. And I hear that, and I don't say anything in return. Is a sin of omission possibly greater than what this person has said? Because I'm now, by not saying anything, allowing that to happen again and again and again, like a disease. Anti-Semitism, same issue. Sins of omission are serious sins, possibly greater than sins of commission.
In a way, it's a subspecies of the whole gossip thing. If somebody says, if I want to say something about somebody and I'm not stopped, or I don't stop myself, it spreads and it's left on the table. So not saying anything, as you point out, can be as problematic. But it really takes a lot of courage, doesn't it, when we have impulses.
Well, and skill, actually. I mean, it depends on the relationship. I don't do this by just coming into a meeting and spieling off. And it also takes talent and skill to do this kindly, properly, etc.
Yes, it
We
does.
don't teach that. We teach often enough. We teach the command not to do it. The commission, we don't teach how to react in these situations.
I like that very much. Yeah, that's good. If we do nothing, what's the problem? But you're saying doing nothing becomes a problem. We're omitting what we should be doing.
Definitely becomes a problem.
I don't think I'll say anything. I'm free. But you're pointing out that in certain circumstances, not saying something is a sin of omission. Yes, Sue?
It's not only, what I'm hearing Doris say, is it's not only a sin of omission, but we don't properly teach people how not to do that.
Yeah. Right, it's hard though, isn't it? Because you have to put a rich ethical palette on the table in order to say, but here's the problem with not doing something about this. Yeah.
You have to create a context and then teach how.
We can criticize doing, Why did Tchaikovsky put those notes in the 1812 overture? But why didn't you do something else is harder? Yeah, because not doing doesn't exist. Let's see if Patty?
I was on the same wavelength as Doris. I felt like the last few pages were really about that space in between, one event and your response. And that space is so hard to navigate. Sometimes things come at us faster than we can respond ethically, or how maybe we want to respond in a way that we think about later and kick ourselves. So what I have been thinking is, if we have a very rich kind of sense of values ourselves, like if we really spent time thinking about what's important to us, racism is a value I think about a lot. I think I would respond much more quickly
Mm-hmm.
because I already have that inside. I've already thought about this a lot. I've read a lot about it. I've had practice with the ideas. So that wouldn't be so troubling. But you can't possibly prepare for everything. But if you have your values solid, it's easier to manage that space, that moment in time where you have to make a quick decision about, do I say anything and how do I say it? How do I exhibit kindness when I'm angry and I really want to yell at somebody? It's just a practice.
Yeah. No, Patty is pointing to the difficulties of the situation as it's unfolding in front of us. And maybe that's part of the goal of education and introspection, to try to think about these things long enough and to reflect on experience that the next time something happens, we have some instincts, we have some intuitions about it. I'm just thinking about, you'll be surprised, a baseball analogy. The more the shortstop practices going to his right to get a ground ball in the hole between short and third, the more he is ready the next time, even though the next time may be totally unique. Maybe it hits a rock or a stone and takes a bounce he's never practiced before. But if he's practiced it over and over again, in that moment, the instincts give him a greater chance of being able to respond to that because he's been to something like that before. So this point here about we develop certain prima facie values and we experience life and reflect on it. And if we do reflect on it and take seriously what we've experienced, that can help us without guaranteeing that we'll be able to handle the next one. By the way, you're talking about morality and interaction. How about citizenship? How about reintroducing civics courses in the curriculum so that people have experience with the values of a society, so that when an emergency arises, we have the wherewithal to deal with it because we've experienced it, not only in the classroom, but we take it home and it stirs around in our minds and so on. And that's a huge omission in our society, isn't it? What it means to be a citizen. Lynn?
To keep that analogy going, I would argue that shortstop's can take more risk when he knows the third baseman's behind him.
Okay, very good. The third baseman's not good enough to get behind him. But let's suppose he is. What you're saying is that if we're working together, we help one another because we're all limited, so partnership is a good thing. There must be first baseman and second baseman. The second baseman probably is backing him up. How do you hit a curveball? By practicing hitting curveballs. Boy, anytime I get a chance to talk about baseball, I'm going to do it. Joe?
I'm going to make a radical statement. We've been talking a lot about morality. I'm going to suggest that there's a whole other lens, which is nothing at all about morality. It's all about the fact that the rabbis were psychologists. So take the situation of the listener is worse than
Yeah.
The sayer is already really energized, and human nature, psychologically, it's hard to hold back.
Mm-hmm.
But the listener's not involved, so it's easier for them to hold back.
Mm.
So it's easier if you're a great psychologist and you want the species to survive, you tell the listener to walk away instead of the speaker, because the listener can walk away more easily than the speaker.
I like that.
Each one of these rules could be seen strictly as smart psychology for the species, for our human species to survive. We might express them in moral terms because it may give us this connection to God or connection to morality. But in fact, these are just smart things so that we don't fight one another, or so that we stop someone from saying evil things, or we stop someone from doing evil things, or we stop our instincts for incest or whatever we're told not to do, by the Torah. So I like the idea of at least, I'm not sure that it detracts from religion, but I like the idea of thinking this as just plain smart way for societies to survive.
I'm with you, except for the word just. This is just psychology, because it's also sociology. What does it mean to be a part of a community? It's also philosophy. Let me think about the implications of various alternatives, right? It's also anthropology. Who are we as human beings? What are our instincts? What are our characteristic vulnerabilities? And therefore, about what do I need to be educated? So I agree that psychology is a part of it, but this really brings in all the ologies, so to speak, sociology, anthropology. So this is really, if you think about it, a comprehensive view of the human condition, its possibilities and its pitfalls. Jim?
A very common saying is, for evil to succeed, all you need is good people to do nothing.
Yeah.
And the most pronounced example of that was the Holocaust.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's Doris's point too about omission. All right, a bar mitzvah is looming. So I'll see you again when I see you. Shabbat shalom. No, we don't. I'm not holding back. We just don't yet.
When I was working with STEM families, which brought people different together, the whole process took 7 years.
Trial and error.
Lots of reading, lots of communicating.
The human condition is complicated, isn't it, brother? And we're trying to find our way